All right, welcome all. So I had originally planned to stream with my good friend Adam Tippett tonight. And so he was going to join me to respond to this video, but then this morning he messaged me and said, last night my cat knocked beer over on my laptop and it ain't working, which means I'm here by myself right now. So I messaged some people last minute, like Joel Correcto and some others, and I said, hey, you want to jump in here? And only Joel got back to me. He may jump in later or not. But yeah, I'm fine flying solo if I need to. This is a fun video that I want to respond to anyway. So, it's good you're all here. Thank you for coming, everyone. So what are we doing today? As you all know, there's a common argument that we see online all the time that Yahweh was originally a pagan deity, or he was part of a polytheistic pantheon. We know a lot of this is obviously the case. It's always asserted as if it's like a fact. And the obvious response that we need to do as Christians, or as anyone with common sense who's read the Bible, I mean, honestly, is to go, yes, you're right. Yes, Yahweh was in part of a pantheon. You know why? Because the biblical authors keep condemning Israel over and over and over for syncretism, for saying that, hey, you should be worshiping God alone. Stop worshiping these other gods like Asherah and Anat and Baal besides Yahweh. So the obvious response Christians should give is go, yeah, we know. But that doesn't change the fact that there was a group of Israelites that were early on who were arguing, no, there's only one God. You should only worship this one, Yahweh. That's it. That's all it should be. End of story. So we're going to review a video tonight that's trying to make the case that no, what actually happened is everyone originally thought Yahweh was part of this polytheistic pantheon, and then he slowly evolved into the monotheistic religion. I don't see a lot of good evidence for that. In fact, our earliest texts that talk about Yahweh that are in the biblical corpus, like Numbers 23, for example, suggest that he was always seen as like a high creator deity, and he was worshipped alone by a group in Israel, even though others, as the biblical authors tell us, came along and said, no, we're going to syncretize. We're going to add this kind of stuff in. We're going to worship Yahweh alongside other gods. I mean, we see this in the incident with the golden calf, in Judges, in First Samuel, as well as throughout the divided monarchy and so on and so on. So there's this constant push and pull. And so what I'm going to basically be arguing is like, that's not what the biblical texts are saying. The biblical texts are clearly saying that Yahweh should be worshiped alone. He's the only God worthy of worship. He's the only creator. He was not, I will disagree, and I don't think there's any good evidence. Yahweh was seen as a lesser deity, as a son of El, as like a storm deity, and he later on he became seen as the high deity. So that's what we're going to be getting into. So I'll get to some super chats here, and then I'll open up the video and we'll get into that. So thank you, Midnight Rider, for becoming a member. Thank you, Liam, for becoming a member. Kitsune asks, a Christian, I'm on the fence as if I can do these. Drive through a red light traffic when nobody is around. Well, you shouldn't. That's just stupid. I did that one time when I was like 20 and there was a cop there. So you may think no one's around. It was like 3 a.m. and there was a cop. Yeah. So I would be careful. Or download a ROM of childhood games that hasn't been sold in over 20 years and the company makes no more money off it, but by law, it'd be considered illegally downloading a game. Okay, so I don't know. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know why you'd be asking me because I'm not a legal expert. I would say I think the way it's set up is that the person who makes the games available is breaking the law, not the person who downloads it, but I'm not sure about that. I don't know. That sounds like something you should sit and talk to your pastor with about. That's not really like, I can't really judge on those kind of things. It's not my area. Did I see you wanted to build a studio? Yeah, that is a goal eventually. If we can get to it this year, we will, but it would depending on the funds we get in. Right now, we don't have it for sure. So if you guys want to donate, just go to inspiringphilosophy.org/give, and you can donate there. We're trying to raise funds now to pay for our editor or hire an editor throughout the next year. If you guys see my Instagram story, we've covered this. So basically, I'm working way too much and I need to stop working so much. So luckily I found a guy who's been helping a lot. His name is Aaron, and he lost his job recently. So he asked us, hey, could you just hire me full-time now? And so we're trying to raise funds. That's why you may have seen us we've been asking for more donations lately, because we really want to bring him on full-time so he can provide for his family. I won't have to keep working 12-hour days. And so that's what we're working on. So if you guys can donate, please go to inspiringphilosophy.org/give. And with that, YouTube has also been saying to start goals. So I made a goal here. So let me start this goal. If we get 50 super chats that are $5 or more in the 2 hours I'm going to stream here, I will show you a sneak peek of an upcoming video we have planned for February. So if you guys get those in, I will also count earlier ones too. So there's like, 1, 2, 3, 4 here, 5. So if you guys get 45, I will still show you because I started the goal after some of the super chats came in. You get the idea. So did you see what Wef Huff posted? Yeah, he told me about that a couple days ago. He said, keep it quiet. So I knew about that Friday. So trust me, I knew what was going on already. It didn't surprise me at all. So yeah, thought it was pretty great. Okay. Yes, I saw. Yes, again, I knew about this. He told me when he was flying there. So Happy, I heard people saying Tom Holland is an unreliable historian. Is that true? No, those are people coping. That they can't debunk him. So this is the kind of crap they're relying on. No, he's considered to be well respected within the history community. Go watch Tim O'Neill's interview with him. Tim O'Neill's an atheist, and he's basically saying, yeah, I think Tom Holland's right. This is ridiculous. It's either just atheist apologists coping with the fact that Tom Holland is made a very good case in his book Dominion, and they don't know how to refute it. And I'm going to be posting a bunch of videos confirming what Tom Holland argued by not relying heavily on his research. I already put out one video, which is how Christianity changed the world. And you can see a lot of studies confirm the same thing Tom Holland is saying. So the idea he's unreliable is absurd nonsense. Merry Christmas. How dare you. Much appreciated. We will definitely take that. And thank you also for the super chat there. All right, so I'm going to get into the video here, and we're going to debunk this nonsense that Yahweh was originally a pagan deity and only became seen as a high creator deity later on. I don't think that's the case. I think there were early Canaanite polytheists. So I there definitely were early polytheists in Israel. Like Joshua says that, when your fathers worshiped other gods in Egypt and beyond the river, he's clearly saying, hey, look, we all used to worship these other gods, but now we've had this revolutionary idea show up, and we had these theophanies, this God revealed us, and now we only worship him. So there's that's going on. I don't think it's the case that he was originally just part of some pantheon and then slowly evolved into a monotheistic high deity. I think there were polytheists, and then there was this revolutionary idea, starting with Abraham, then with Moses and Joshua. Yeah, and then some other people were like, well, we're just going to take this new Yahweh and just incorporate him into our own pantheons. And then there was this constant fight between those who represented the biblical authors and their followers to compete with people who wanted to make him more polytheistic. So this video was sent to me by numerous people. It's on a smaller channel. He's got a very soothing, good documentary voice, but unfortunately, he makes a lot of errors here. So let's get into it, and then I'll get to some more super chats here in a bit.
The polytheistic origin of Yahweh. Judaism originated among Semitic tribes in Canaan in modern-day Israel and Palestine. Judaism became known for its strict monotheism, but Israel was originally polytheistic. Among their gods were El and Yahweh, who later became two names for the same Jewish God.
All right, so let's stop there. So, first of all, there's no evidence for this. This is a scholarly reconstruction by a lot of critical scholars or liberal scholars who want to suggest this. But some of our earliest texts, like, for example, Numbers 23:8 says, how can I curse whom El is not cursed? How can I denounce whom Yahweh has not denounced? This is using Hebrew parallelism. And he's basically saying El and Yahweh are the same deity. In Numbers 23, the oracles of Balaam seem to be a very, very early text. So in our earliest texts, we see evidence that they're already equating El and Yahweh, and El is always seen as the high creator deity. And it seems that Israel just had a very distinct name for him, which was Yahweh. And they had a specific theology, a specific way of worshiping him, a specific way of doing things. We don't see any evidence, and we'll get to Deuteronomy 32 later, I promise. But we don't see any good evidence that Yahweh was originally seen as separate from El. Okay. Psalm 10:12. Some say this is early, some say it's late. It says, "Arise, O Yahweh, O El, lift up your hand." Okay. Psalm 51. I think a lot of more scholars tend to say this is an earlier psalm. It says, "El Elohim, Yahweh, speak and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to the setting." So it seems as though we have evidence from the earliest layers of the Hebrew Bible that El and Yahweh were just seen as two names of the same deity in Israel. Good book is only one God. Minder Dijkstra says, he notes out that we see a lot of use of El epithets in the later period. And he says the revival of El's names and epithets in the exilic and post-exilic theological vocabulary is only explicable in the light of the tenuous, never broken tradition that El Yahweh is and was identical with the patriarchal El Elohi Israel, El the God of Israel. So it seems as though the reason why they were comfortable in later times saying that using El epithets and names to talk about Yahweh was there was just this long-standing tradition that El and Yahweh were seen as the same deity. Here's another quote that they say, Carl, I think it's Carl Vandertoorn, I forget, but it's in this book here, and there's the page number 916. It is often argued that originally Yahweh was much more like El than Baal. In the patriarchal narrative of Genesis, El names such as El Olam, El Elyon are frequently used as epithets of Yahweh. Various scholars have drawn the conclusion that El and Yahweh were identified at a rather early stage. This identification is sometimes explained by assuming that Yahweh is originally an El figure. And I think that's probably the case. What basically you have, this isn't my hypothesis, is that you had Canaanites worshiping multiple deities. You had Abraham move in. He knows about El. El appears to him and gives him a special name for him. Same thing happens with Moses. He revives this. And he says, listen, you're worshiping me wrong. I'm not part of a pantheon. I am El, the only God that you should be worshiping. And then he gives him that special name, Yahweh, as well, when he talks to Moses, so that Israel will know this name and he could go use it for them. So it seems that it was a special covenantal name between El and Israel. And that name was signified by the name Yahweh. So it doesn't seem that Yahweh was originally seen as a son of El. We don't see any good evidence of that. Also, again, I was going to have Adam on with me from his channel is linked below. As I said, his computer got fried from his cat, but he wanted to say this, and here's what he wrote down for me to say on his behalf. He says, that means the video we're responding to, mentions that Israel was a polytheistic society, and he has got that right, but not really. In his book, The Origin and Character of God, Theodore Lewis, which came out in 2020, after listing a slew of gods in the Canaanite pantheon, including Yahweh in his introduction, adds that this list is partial, as it does not include the various local and regional manifestations of the same deity. So our friend alludes that Israel was certainly polytheistic, but I would stress that Canaan is a better word than Israel in this context, which was polytheistic prior to the entrance of a mixed multitude into Canaan in the late 13th century, according to Deuteronomy 7:7. And then Adam says he is definitely following Finkelstein's model of an Exodus or the peaceful revolution model, which will propel him to this side with the northern hypothesis on the origin of Yahweh. Yeah, we get that. But you get the idea here is that we don't really see any good evidence of this. It seems it's far more likely that Yahweh was just another name for El, and it was only given to Israel, or at least the children of Isaac, so maybe the people in Adam as well, as a special covenantal language. So let me get back into the video here. How are we doing on Super Chats? You guys getting those in? Excellent. That's great. I know you're all nodding your heads, which I appreciate. So let's play some more here.
Clues about their pantheon can be found in the Bible and among clay tablets from the ancient city Ugaritic, from between 1500 and 1300 BC. And these tablets predate the first historical mention of Israel on the Merneptah stele from 1208 BC. On these tablets, we read that both Yahweh and El were part of a large family of gods.
All right, so let's stop there. No, we don't. He says it very confidently, but that's just false. Yahweh's not mentioned it in any Ugaritic tablets. He's not mentioned at Ugarit. I believe the first definitive mention of Yahweh is the Moabite stele, which I believe dates to the about 840 BC. Some think he may be mentioned in an earlier Egyptian inscription, mentions the Shashu of Yahweh, dates to the time of Amenhotep III. But I mean, Egyptologists like Kenneth Kitchen and David Falk say, no, that's not. So I would love for that to be a mention of Yahweh, because it refers to Shashu in the region of Edom, which would be the children of Isaac through Esau worshiping Yahweh. But it's from what I've seen, there's a lot of debate about that, and most lean on the side that no, it's not Yahweh. So I tend to, when I first heard it, I remember getting really excited about that, but it's probably not accurate. The earliest description, again, is the Moabite stele. Yahweh is not mentioned at Ugarit, so he is just flat out wrong here. This is not at all what's going on.
Baal, who was later attacked as a false god in the Bible, was also part of this family. And the god El even had a wife named Asherah.
So to be clear, it's the name is Asherah is not at Ugarit. I mean, that is the Hebrew equivalent, but I think it's like Astarte, or there's another way to pronounce it, I believe. But I mean, it's not specifically Asherah, but it's probably referring to the same goddess, just by a different name.
Fragments of these polytheistic beliefs can also be found in the Bible in some archaic passages that have escaped later redaction.
So we'll get into that. I don't see any evidence for that. Let me skip ahead a little bit here, because he's just going to like promo something. And I'd rather just get on with the video.
In the 2nd millennium BC, Canaan was inhabited by various tribes, each with its own patron god. These gods belonged to the Canaanite pantheon, which included the god El, Baal, and Yahweh, which all appear in the Bible. In time, the Israelites came to believe that they were not of Canaanite origin. Yet archaeological remains and linguistic and religious comparisons from 1200 to 1000 BC indicate that Israel formed within the Canaanite culture. In all these domains, there's just too big of an overlap, often to the point where they are indistinguishable.
Okay, so problems there. For one, see my series Exodus Rediscovered. We have plenty of evidence that Israel was a group of Semitic people that came out of Egypt, moved into Canaan in the 13th century BC. Overlap between Canaanite and Israelite culture, that doesn't mean they were Canaanites or they evolved from Canaanites. Case in point, they were both Semitic people from the Levant, from the southern Levant too. So we would expect a lot of cultural overlap. Exodus also says a mixed multitude went up with Israel, probably Canaanites wanting to return to Canaan and joining the people of Israel. We would expect a lot of cultural similarity. So the mere fact there's cultural similarity between Israel and Canaan doesn't show the Israelites were just a Canaanite group that evolved or came out of Canaan and didn't actually come from Egypt. There was no Exodus. That doesn't get you to your conclusion. The data that we see is perfectly consistent with the biblical account as well, that there was an Exodus and people came out of Egypt. And there's more data, as I discussed in Exodus Rediscovered, that shows there probably was an Exodus of some kind. There's a lot of unexplainable internal clues that show Israel had to have some affinity with Egypt to the point that they had to be living there. Like Benjamin Noonan's research strongly suggests that, for example, which I cover in Exodus Rediscovered Part 1, which is part 1 of there's 3 parts total. So we also need to remember that Israelites intermarried with the Canaanites early on. So Judah, for example, married a Canaanite, and his descendants were half Canaanite then. So I mean, like they brought in Canaanites. Like Rahab, for example, was a Canaanite brought in to live with Israel as well. Again, Adam Tippett wanted to say this. He says, talking about the video, he says he seems to reject the exodus from Egypt on every scale, which is now going against the growing consensus of scholarly approval in favor within the past 20 to 25 years. And I think he's referring to just generally this idea that there had to be some kind of exodus, whether it's the Levite, whether it's a small group, whether it was a large group. It seems that they're more and more are moving in that direction. There had to be some exodus, even if they disagree with the full-scale biblical version. Adam says, you can hear Finkelstein ooze out of the mouth, choosing the pastoral revolt model over the origin of Israel. And as far as its dates of 1200 to 1000, what the archaeological record reveals is an influx of outsiders. We begin to see four-room houses and the absence of pig bones to start, all dating to the beginning of this period. Not to mention a population increase in the Levant at this time, during when the late Bronze Age and the Levant experienced a population decline. So we do see some pretty distinct changes happening in Canaan around this time. Again, the population explosion, the new Israelite sites lack pig bones, new structures and homes is what Adam says. So there is that to deal with. So it's not as clear cut as he's making it out in this video here. But let's continue on, and then I will get to some super chats in a minute.
Yet Israel in time did break itself off from the other Canaanites, at least by 1208 BC, because both Canaan and Israel are mentioned as separate entities on the stele by Pharaoh Nermeptah. In a longer text celebrating Egypt's victory over its neighbors, we read the sentences, "Plundered is the Canaan," and also, "Israel is laid waste."
I honestly believe if we didn't have this inscription from about, 1208 BC or so, roughly around then, there would be so many people saying that Israel didn't exist until Omri. Like, this shows there was a people group of Israel very, very early on and would have taken place just after the Exodus. This is more powerful than I think people realize.
Interestingly, the hieroglyphs used to denote Canaan signify that it is a land, while the glyph for Israel denotes that it is a people.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Israel's not like a land or nation. It just kind of mentioned them as a people group there, which is, again, would be very consistent with the biblical account.
The original god of the tribe of Israel seems to have been El, and there are a couple pieces of evidence for this. For one, even the word Israel itself means El rules.
Okay, this kind of bothered me here, because it's not that he's wrong, it's that he's not giving people the full picture. That could be the meaning of Israel, El rules, but there is a lot of debate about this. So, like, it could mean El preserves, El shall fight, Prince of God, a man seeing God. According to Genesis 32, it most likely means he who contends with God or he who wrestles with God. There's a whole debate about this, and he's just sort of presenting it as if, like, yeah, it just means El rules. And it's like, maybe, I mean, but don't pretend like that's it when there's not any sort of clear indication that this is definitely El rules. There's a whole big debate about this thing here. So yeah, I don't think that really works the way he thought it did. So here, I'm gonna get to some super chats here, and then we will jump back into this. So believe it or not, Rick and Morty tried a similar argument in their story train episode. Yeah, this is a common argument. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like one of those things they tell over and over again. If we just say it enough, it'll just be true. And there's not a lot of good evidence for it when you really get into the weeds. It's like, it's ridiculous. Like saying when you constantly hear, there's no evidence for the Exodus. There's no evidence for the Exodus. There's a lot of evidence for the Exodus. Do you have any plans on a rebuttal video against the young Earth expositioning? No, that's pure nonsense. I'm not going to waste time on that. I mean, if they're just going to keep missing the point, I'm not going to even worry. I can't even watch a lot of the atheist videos because they make me so frustrated over how many lie or ignore their evidence. These streams help me watch them and have an answer to claim. So thank you. You're welcome. And what's good with these streams is you go through them, and it's not only just giving you good evidence. I'm trying to teach you how to respond and think about these things. So training your brain, listen to these streams, think about how to use these kind of arguments in your own words, and just listening to myself and guests cover these things is going to be kind of helpful for that. Is Yahweh the Father or the Trinity in the Old Testament? There are some conflicting answers on this. So I don't think the Trinity is like a named thing. That's a concept we use to explain the nature of God. God is three persons, and we call this the Trinity. Yahweh is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're all Yahweh. There's not another person called the Trinity, which we call Yahweh. Yahweh is the Father, Jesus is Yahweh, and the Holy Spirit is Yahweh, yet they're all one. So you got to think of it more like that. Jesus does claim to be Yahweh multiple times. Like in Luke 6 and Matthew 7, he says, like Luke 6, I believe he says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do as I tell you?" Now people go, why is he saying Lord twice? Well, in the Greek at that time, the only being ever claimed to be Lord, Lord, Kyrios, is Yahweh. Because when they translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, there were places where it has Adonai Yahweh, and they render that as Lord, Lord, or Kyrios. Jesus also says he's Kyrios. There are no examples in Greek from the time or prior where anyone claims to be Lord, Lord, other than Jesus and Yahweh. Therefore, Jesus is most likely claiming to be Yahweh. Did you see that Wes made it on the Joe Rogan? Yes, for the 1 millionth time. Yes, I've seen it. Really appreciate your contact. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, IP, for all you're doing. What is the best method to find credible studies online? I like JSTOR. JSTOR is a pretty good site. Sometimes Google Scholar, you'll get some pretty good stuff there. That's a good place to go to as well. Yeah, that'd be one of my favorite places to go to. Trying to think what else. Excellent. I have a guest that showed up here. Welcome. I'm not alone anymore.
Hello. How's
Welcome.
it going?
So I am now joined by the great and famous Joel Carrico here on YouTube, who is also an actual Hebrew Bible scholar. Is that correct?
I'm a Septuagint scholar. Can you hear me though? Can you hear me in my headphones?
Just
okay,
fine.
making
Yeah.
sure. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm a Septuagint scholar, and I call myself a biblical scholar because I hate being pigeonholed. That's it.
Well, yeah. Joel's going to be on my channel again really soon. We're going to cover some stuff on child sacrifice and but thank you coming on the last minute here since my guest had a computer emergency and can't do the stream with me. So appreciate you coming
Literal
in
last minute. Like I got out of the shower and you're like, hey, now. Okay.
I was nicer. I was like, if you wanna, I mean, I'm not saying if you can, it's if you're not busy. I mean, if you're busy, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I can probably hang out for a little bit. I'm not sure if I can do the whole thing, but honestly, I barely even know what we're talking about here. So I'm listening and I'll throw in some comments. I'll say you're an idiot in other places and it'll be good.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So yeah, let me put the video back up and then we will get to some more super chats here in a little bit here. So yeah, we're responding to this guy. So far he has claimed that we know Yahweh was in a pantheon because he's mentioned it the Ugaritic in Ugaritic texts. Is that true?
Are you talking to me?
Sorry, yeah, he said that Yahweh was in a pantheon at Ugaritic.
No, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing of Yahweh at Ugaritic.
Exactly. Yeah, there's that. But yeah, we're gonna get the more biblical stuff now here, so that should be more interesting here. So let me play the video and we will keep trugging along here. So
we get another clue by studying the different authors of the Bible, which were identified in the 19th century, because these authors used Hebrew from different historical periods.
Stop.
And these authors are now called the E, the J, and the P sources. Okay. And much more on them in the next lecture.
All right, there you go. I wanted to let him finish his thought there.
Yeah, I'm hopping in here just completely without context, really. I think I looked quickly over before you sent me something, but he just said different languages of the different sources, and like that, yeah. That's just not true. So there are different people make claims for different themes, and maybe you'll have certain like catchwords or something that might be claimed between like the big ones would be like P, like a priestesaurus and a non-P, but he's actually making the earlier, the more Wellhausian kind of approach to the sources, the E source, the Elohim source, the Yahwistic source. But to say that you could actually tell the different like time frames that the Hebrew is being that the Hebrew represents is just not true. Like the Hebrew is in the Pentateuch, it's classical biblical Hebrew. If you take that model, which many do, the person I trained under wrote a book on it. The different stages of biblical Hebrew, and so I would say the Pentateuch, by and large. Always have the asterisks. It's the same language. It's just there are different reasons that people separate these into sources, and it's not like you just open it up and if you know Hebrew, it's like, oh, here's where one breaks into the next one. Here's where one breaks into the next one. It's not that simple or simplistic.
Yeah, and I would also say that he sort of represents like a classical documentary hypothesis. Most scholars today don't think E was its own source. And so now you'll see more common in the literature that they'll just combine E and J as non-P. So there'll be non-P, D, there's redactional layers that are debated. And the like European scholarship, like I was talking with Benjamin Kilker about this, and he said like he doesn't understand why American or North American scholars still hold to a lot of documentary hypotheses. They use more supplementary or fragmentary or combinations. And even the priestly source has been coming under scrutiny. There's a great book called Farewell to the Priestly Writing ? And
I saw that.
Yeah, he makes the case that there was a P source, but it wasn't like a source. It was sort of like an uncompleted source that was then added in to supplement the non-P. So, but it's like so like confusing and convoluted, and it seems like it's just, the explanation is just becoming more and more ad hoc as they go on to try to explain the different sources here. So it's not all it's cracked up to be, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, my own opinion on it is I tentatively hold to, I hold to there being multiple sources in the Pentateuch because the Pentateuch literally says that. In the book of Numbers, it says, hey, this is written in the book of the wars of Yahweh.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, the Pentateuch is made up of sources. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyone out there who doesn't like the idea the Pentateuch has sources, the Pentateuch says it is made of sources. So then it just goes from there. Like, okay, well, how then do we divvy this up? How do we think about it? I think a lot is up in the air. I kind of leave a lot up in the air at this point, and I'm not beholden to one or another. Structure.
I would say I totally agree with you. I would say one of my big things is, there definitely were sources for the Pentateuch. I don't think we can reconstruct them at all. And I did a whole series, like there's like 10 videos so far of where I respond to basically the documentary hypothesis, the idea there's this J and E or non-P, P and D source, and there's not a lot of good evidence. I think what happened is the biblical authors had an original corpus. It was supplemented a lot over time throughout Israel's history, updated language for sure. But I don't think we can reconstruct the original sources of the Pentateuch, or that they're all sort of just preserved in there. I don't think that's at all how they were writing in that time,
Yeah, to say that you can definitively show where one source begins, where another ends, I've found that pretty problematic in my own research, and I can't speak I haven't given my life to source criticism or to the rejection of it or anything, but in my work in Exodus, the amount of times that you just see like no one agrees, like just no one agrees on where things are like, that's not completely true. I know there's general agreement on like the tabernacle account, priestly stuff, but like when it comes to some of the nitty gritty, like it's just, it always is just everybody's has their own opinion. Here's a thought, but it oftentimes I found unsatisfactory because it's just, there's not enough agreement to say, in so many cases. Yeah. So broad scale sources, sure. Supplementary, sure. I mean, scribal culture, we talked about this before privately, just how scribal culture, we were talking about Vandertorn's work and how in the ancient Near East, the way authorship worked just functioned differently than the way that we think of authorship. So communal authorship, things being edited over time, things being supplemented, adjusted, language adjusted, all that kind of, that's all par for the course. So if people can get by that, if people can accept that, that's different than the way a lot of Christians think about how we think about authorship often in the West. But if you can accept that, then all of this is just like it doesn't even really matter. It's just the way that they were writing back then.
Right. And if anyone's interested, my series on documentary hypothesis is linked below. Scholars like Joshua Berman, Benjamin Kilker, Kenneth Berglund, they've all helped me work on that. So that was reviewed by a lot of people, and like Kilker was great. He even sent me some of his papers before they were published so I could get videos out at the same time. And so, that was a fun series to put together. I had a lot of fun doing that, working with scholars on that one. So, all right, let me play another section.
My favorite video of yours, not that I've seen them all, but my favorite video of yours is the one on Genesis 2 and 3. And then the temple imagery, comparisons and stuff like that, which is based on Kilker's work, which I thought was just awesome.
Yeah, that's the paper he sent me ahead of time, and then my video came out like the same week his paper was published or around that, so it worked out really well. So
excellent.
All right, we'll play the next section here.
In Genesis, source P and source E call God by the name El from the beginning, all the way up to the point where God reveals himself as Yahweh to Moses.
So that's not entirely true. So they don't use El, they mostly use Elohim, which is just a generic term for God or divine being or spiritual being. The hypothetical e-source uses Yahweh in places like Genesis 20:18, 21:33, 28:21. It's really, the argument is actually that the P source uses Elohim until Exodus 6:3. Then it starts using Yahweh and Elohim interchangeable. That's the actual argument. He doesn't seem to actually know it, unfortunately, or he's misrepresented it. Sounds good. Sounds good.
We read, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai. But by my name Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. So here that name switch was incorporated into the story.
So yeah, this is one of the biggest arguments in favor of the documentary hypothesis, or something, that there's a contradiction here, because you go through like the hypothetical J source or non-P source. We see the patriarchs talking with Yahweh all the time. In Exodus 6:3, and it says, I didn't let them know about this name. This is I only made known to you, Moses, and the people now. So people go, well, maybe there was P and non-P. Non-P has the patriarchs using the name Yahweh, and P does not until Exodus 6:3. I have problems with that. So I talk about this a lot more in my video, which is linked below in the documentary hypothesis series. Did the patriarchs know Yahweh? One, some scholars have argued it could be translated as a rhetorical question. So they put forward some grammatic arguments that it could be like saying, I am El Shaddai. Did I not make my name Yahweh known to them? That could be translated that way. Some say no, that's straining the text. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm divided on it. I know that Anderson, from like the Anderson Forbes edition of the Hebrew Bible, I think he made that argument in I think it's the 90s, if I'm remembering. Again, I'm coming in here with no notes or anything in the 90s, but it's been recently supported by those like Carmen Imes, who is also working in Exodus in a lot of really good ways. I think it's plausible. I don't know if it's airtight. I don't think it's airtight. But it certainly would make sense of things. And there's a grammatical argument for it, which I will not rehash right now because, again, I just hopped in here. But I don't know.
Yeah,
it's possible.
The other argument some scholars have put forward is that we have to remember that names were not just like identifiers; they also revealed functions, very important aspects of the being. And so like scholars like John Walton have argued that what Exodus 6:3 is saying is that God didn't reveal the function of the name Yahweh yet. So now he's revealing it because it's the covenantal name. He's bringing Israel out of Egypt back to Canaan to fulfill that covenantal promise. And so that's also, I think, a much better possibility. I tend to lean that way, and I think that's what is happening there. However, I do want to put up a slide here. So in that video I covered on Exodus 6:3, I cited a couple, I believe, like Richard Elliott Friedman, and one of the things he notes is that when the supposed four sources were combined, the redactor removed all intolerable contradictions. So he left some in, but he removed all the intolerable contradictions. Well, Exodus 6:3 compared with the patriarchal narratives of them knowing Yahweh seems to be a pretty intolerable contradiction, because you've just written, or you put together all these Genesis accounts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knowing the name Yahweh. Then you leave in this verse where they apparently didn't. That seems like an intolerable contradiction. So then here's my philosophical argument challenging the documentary hypothesis. Okay, so you have to posit a redactor who combined the four sources. He was supposed to smooth out contradictions, according to Richard Elliott Friedman, remove intolerable contradictions. But then he left an intolerable contradiction with Genesis in Exodus 6:3. So therefore, it is likely this actually was a tolerable issue for the redactor. This wasn't an intolerable contradiction. He probably just didn't interpret it or understand it the way modern critical scholars do. So it's more likely he understood Genesis 6:3 as not contradicting Genesis, and it's probably more likely to be one of the two hypotheses I promoted, that it's a rhetorical question or it's mentioning the function of the name. And so this equally means the author could have written the Pentateuch as it is ultimately. So if it wasn't a problem for the hypothesized redactor, why would it have been a problem for authors who could have composed the Pentateuch as it is? Yes, of course, using sources, but as sort of like an original work for them. So this is my philosophical challenge to the documentary hypothesis. You basically have to posit a redactor who was smoothing out contradictions, getting rid of intolerable contradictions, but he left in an intolerable contradiction according to the proponents. So which is it? Like, which is it? Was he actually smoothing it out or not smoothing it out? This seems to make the documentary hypothesis more ad hoc. And therefore, I think because of this, it's going to be more likely that he didn't understand Exodus 6:3 the same way modern critical scholars do, as contradicting Genesis. And so that's why I think some of the other views that I had mentioned are far more likely when we start looking into this.
Yeah, I really like that you brought this slide up, because when you were talking, this is not this like the exact thing you have in front of you, but this is the vein that I was thinking in, which is, okay, well, you've got editors coming in on this hypothesis, and obviously they would want to get rid of like the most glaring contradiction when it comes to the names, right? And it just doesn't make sense. So apparently they read it differently. And I give, and I know you do as well, far more weight to the editorial ability of the scribes who are responsible for the Hebrew Bible. I think that they're often, I will use Bible Project language because I like it, literary ninjas. They're very crafty in what they do, and I think the craftiness and the detail is far more than is often assumed in modern critical scholarship. Not to plug myself, but you read a paper that I just recently wrote.
It was really good.
Yeah. And I'm basically just making that claim, like, hey, we need to be more careful about what's going on underneath the hood, and what are like the subtle ways that an author or an editor might be conveying things in even the Pentateuch. So that's more of the way that I view things, and Pentateuchal scholarship in general. I'm more in that camp, which is not necessarily the one that's currently winning the day, but I think it will have a renaissance, hopefully in the near future. I'm not sure.
Did the people I connected you with to send you that paper, did they receive it?
They did. Yeah. They're currently talking it over.
Oh, good. That's what I was hoping to hear. Good. I'm glad they're talking it over. I think it'd be great for them to include that. So more on that in a couple months when that comes out. I'm gonna have some scholars on my channel to promote a book.
But while we're still on the topic of Exodus 6, so the idea of revealing a name, I think that's also a very plausible explanation. Searles, I believe his name is. Again, I'm going everything from memory right now. And I believe Searles wrote a book on like the revelation of the divine name in Exodus, and basically makes the claim. So you have this idea right after, I will be who I will be, right? This phrase, and the way that Hebrew syntax works is that it basically leaves the statement up to the determination of the author. So like it's saying, watch and see what I'll be. I'm going to be whatever I want to be. And you know what? You're going to have to see what I'm going to be. And the idea being that over the book of Exodus, you then have a literary tension and building that's going on until the name reveal in 34. And so you're actually waiting, like, who then is Yahweh? He's going to be who I've seen and he's shown, but tell us, who are you? And then you get the big name reveal at the end. So as literature, reading it as literature, I think there's actually a through line there. And the author is trying to build kind of a story and a climax that comes at the end of the Golden Calf narrative. So I think there's a lot to say for the idea of the name reveal, and this being also a way that the literature is the way that they convey intricate ideas in their literature.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, let's get to some super chats here because they're piling up. What is the best method to find credible studies online? I answered this earlier, but I thought you may have some insight.
Oh, sure. The best method to find credible studies online. It depends what you mean. Do you mean find peer-reviewed research? Do you mean finding like blog posts? I think
he wants credible studies, like peer-reviewed. I think that's what he's referring to. So think,
yeah. I use a bunch of different sources. A good one actually is just Google Scholar. Going on Google Scholar, typing in the subject matter, whatever it is, if it's a verse or if you've got some keywords or something, and then checking how many times something's been cited, because that is important, because that means that people are at least grappling with the ideas, thinking that they're worth engaging with. So you can see credibility that way. If you just see a paper that's like kind of bad font and is some guy trying to write it as though it were an academic paper not associated with any journal that publishes it or has peer review, you be careful. That doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. Also check, is this like a paper given at a conference? So does this person at least have the credentials to be giving it at a conference?
Yeah.
And then publishers, people, has it been vetted? You want to be checking. So if it goes through a publisher, check the publisher, check the website. Okay, who is this publisher? Is it just some company, or is it a place that has many books, many associations? It takes a little bit more work that way, but there's just so much on the internet, so you're going to have to do a little bit of extra work, unfortunately, if you're going to want to find credible studies. One really good way, though, is once you find something good, or you hear from somebody, hey, this is a good source, and it's current in the last 10, 15 years, let's say, then just go to that book or resource and check the footnotes. Because if it's good, that means they're engaging with basically everything in the field. The goal as a scholar is to engage with everything you can on the idea that you're looking at, as much as possible, and within the confines of your research question, right? And so, for example, the paper we were just talking about, that we won't get into any further, but that one there, I went through every single source I could find on the topic, like for the last 100 years. It took me weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And I'm trying to cite everything I can that relates to the matter at hand. And so good scholarship is going to try and do that. So you're going to be able to find at least one good recent resource, and then use the footnotes as a guide, because then they've read the stuff. They're saying this is worth citing. This is part of the debate. Now, does it always work? No. But that's, at least those are some steps to get you there.
Yeah, we're going to have to turn that paper that Joel's been mentioning into a video someday. I really thought it'd make a good graphic video, so we'll be doing that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Let's get it vetted first.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We'll wait on that. So MythVision's deceptive videos are starting to catch up to him. He recently mischaracterized Wes Huff in a video and got roasted in the comments section. Yeah, what a surprise. He recently tried to do a video on me, and he used false information to try to defame me. He claimed that I had a conversation with Josh Bowen and then went and did a presentation, when actually I did the presentation over a month before I talked to Josh, but he presented it as he talked to Josh and then he went out and did this, and clearly he was fishing and didn't want to use any of the information Josh gave him. Meanwhile, Josh even left the conversation with, I need to do more research before I have a final conclusion after I gave the presentation. So it was pretty deceptive, and I lost so much respect for him there. And it's like, dude, just don't even try to make it personal. Let's just focus on the data, man. This is ridiculous. I heard Winger sent out the Wingalings lobbying to get Rogan to interview Wes. Thousands of Wingalings descended upon Austin like an autistic flood of Noah. Urging this even 40 days and 40 nights. Listen, I have no comment on that. I don't know what you're referring to. But yes, Wes Huff is now on Joe Rogan, and that should be out soon. So that'll be exciting.
That's wild.
I know.
Yeah.
We were so ecstatic. Yeah.
That's so strange to me. It's like, he just talked. It was just some little video where he was showing someone being dumb on the internet, and now you're on Rogan. Is that all it takes?
Yeah.
Can we do that right now? Can we get on Rogan?
Yes. You see? Yeah, it's awesome. I love that God has really just pushed him out into to get exposure, and he'll be back on my channel soon. We're gonna respond to a Dan McClellan video, because Dan decided he was gonna go after Wes, and Wes is like, "This is you wanna fight me on stuff I like my specialty is on." Yeah, Dan decided to try to debunk him on some of the stuff that Wes is a specialty on. So we'll be covering that in the future. We just want to get through the holidays first. So
early Christian manuscripts. That stuff.
Yeah. Okay, that's Wes. That's Wes. That's his field. That's his specialty. And Dan is trying to get him.
I haven't seen any of this. I didn't know this was happening. That's really interesting. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, don't worry. We've got a good fun stream plan with Wes again. So, is there any evidence of prophetic scribal communities in the Old Testament? Daniel seems to suggest it, but not in the way that Heiser talks about it.
I mean, you see prophetic communities. Like I was just reading the other day with my kids through, I think this was First Kings, yeah. And you see that in Bethel, There's this where their prophets were. There's basically a school of prophets in Bethel. Maybe it's Samuel? Sorry, I think I'm wrong there. And so you could see in the story itself that there's a grouping. They exist as some sort of organized, distinct group of prophets, which then means there's probably a school. Now, says scribal, so written text, written prophecy. That's, I think, a different question. I mean, the fact that we have a whole bunch, there were obviously scribal schools. Now, are they asking? I don't know exactly what they're asking then, because if by virtue of the fact we have the Old Testament, there's scribal schools, duh.
Yeah.
But are they saying that it? What are they saying? Yeah, actually, what are they even saying?
I think Richard Elliott Friedman talked about one in his book, where he argues for a documentary hypothesis. One at Shiloh, there was a scribal community there, and he thinks that's where a lot of the texts were being held or kept or preserved, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there were definitely these scribal communities for sure, preserving texts.
I just don't even understand. It's almost like a tautologist question, isn't it? It's like,
I think so.
Are there evidence of prophetic scribal communities, but in the OT, but the OT is produced by scribal communities?
Yeah, the Old Testament is evidence of scribal communities,
many of which are prophetic.
Yeah.
So I just don't know.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to ignore that first line. How dare you? Hi, IP. Any upcoming debates? Yeah, I'm going to be debating Lawrence Krauss in February in person on which is better for humanity, Christianity, or secularism. So should be a fun debate. I've got a lot of studies I want to use there. Have you reacted to Alex O'Connor's video titled Yahweh, the Storm Deity to Israelite video? I haven't seen anybody react or respond to it. I'll look at it. I think it was like super long and I just didn't feel like going through it. And, we've covered this a lot. There's just no text that ever say Yahweh was a storm deity. This is a scholarly reconstruction, but the data is so limited. I think it's stretching what we have available in a lot of ways. And even Mark Smith says when he talks about it, saying that Yahweh was originally a storm deity, he says, I'm guessing. He says he uses that term. So, I mean, like, I don't really put a lot of stock in that.
I mean, you could make the lateral move from, I'm trying to think of the Hebrew, but it's escaping my mind right now. So I'll just do English. Like Yahweh, the Cloud Rider, which is
that's what
an
they
epithet of Baal, and Baal being a storm god, and because Yahweh is taking on the title of Baal, which again, man, the Hebrew is escaping me. Rochev what? Anyways,
one job. It's one job.
Yeah, one job. And so because of the same title, and I think it's exact. Like when you go from Ugaritic to Hebrew, it is a takeover of the name of Baal, a title of Baal as Cloud Rider. That would then at least be an indication towards the storm deity being associated with Yahweh. There's other texts as well, like some of the Psalms where it talks about coming down in the clouds and all that. So I think it's possible. Pardon me?
I've heard so many. Like, he was originally a storm deity. No, he's originally a sun deity. No, he's originally a metallurgy deity. Like, there's just like. Well,
actually, so can I make a little? This is actually very. This pertains to what we're talking about in this video and what we're critiquing. Can I make a little comment here?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think it's just a broader thing that people might want to know. A really good book is Michael Hundley, Yahweh Among the Gods. I believe it is. I think it's just from a few years ago. And what he says in this book is that, and I love the analogy, he uses a marketplace analogy where you get a company that takes over all the other companies and their names, and they all kind of get subsumed underneath one name. And so you'll get like an Amazon taking all these companies, and now Amazon is this corporate thing, and you've got all the other titles underneath Amazon. And he says that's what happens in the ancient world as well. And I think he can show that. You can show that a deity is powerful and is lauded and is better because it takes on the names of other deities. And so you see when Yahweh taking on the names of other deities, that should not be shocking to anyone. That is what you do when you say you are supreme, is you take their title and you're better than them. And we see this across the ancient Near East, and Hundley does a great job showing this in his work. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we see Yahweh as having the same title as Baal, because he's better than Baal. That's the claim. Right. And you take the names of the gods, you're better than. And you see this happen in like in the Enuma Elish, for example, when Marduk takes over all these other names, and like you just see it. Everyone is doing this. And so it's just a question of then who is Yahweh? It's not a matter of just because you see other names attached to Yahweh, El, whatever. Like everybody is doing this, because if you don't do this, you're not playing the game, and no one's going to take you seriously. So then the question is, who is the God who is then taking these names and saying, I'm superior? What are they like? What is their name? Right. And so I think this is actually important and germane to the discussion we're having right now, because in some ways it almost makes it moot. It's like, yes, obviously these names are being taken on and associated. That doesn't mean that they're identifying the same deity or in a pantheon or all that. Like, because these things are in such great flux, I think it's just oftentimes overstating the case with the data because of stuff like this, these cultural norms for deity naming.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll come back to that a little bit later in the stream. Hey, IP, I really enjoy your content. Keep up the good work in defending Christianity. Please subscribe. Yeah, everyone watching, make sure you subscribe. If you don't, I'll be sad. I will shed a tear. And then Joel will have to comfort me. And that'll be awkward. We don't want that. So,
no, not really.
Yeah. Did you hear? I'm very sensitive, Joel. I'm so sensitive.
You're a sensitive guy. Yeah. No, I know. Yeah,
sensitive.
I'm holding back any critical stuff right now against you.
Yeah. Hey, I normally don't donate on YouTube, but since I heard you're underfunded, I decided to. Your videos on the Trinity in the Old Testament helped me. I appreciate that. I need to update that. It's a very old video. But yeah, I appreciate it. So it's not like I'm underfunded. It's my editor. I was working with a guy and I was like, it'd be great to bring you on full time one day when we have the funds. His name is Aaron. Well, we just found out in like November, he was losing his full-time job. And for those who don't know, he's got 5 kids. And he's like, is there any way you could just hire me full-time now? So the past month, we've really been picking up, like trying to get more funding. Hey guys, could you help us out here? Because it's a win-win. We'll get him to be on full-time. He'll be able to make more high-quality videos. I won't have to keep working 12-hour days. That'll be nice. And you guys will get a bunch of high-quality videos. If anyone can help donate, just go to inspiringphilosophy.org/give and help us get funded so Aaron can have a job. So
those 12-hour days, aren't they nice? Aren't they nice, Michael?
Oh, totally. So, all right, let's get back to this video because we've been off it for a while.
Thirdly, 17 characters in Genesis have names compounded with El, such as Bethel, while there are no names that contain Yahweh. And interestingly, there's also one name compounded with Baal, namely Benjamin's son, Ashbal, which is curious since Baal would later be recognized as one of the false gods by the Israelis.
So, Joel, he seems to think Baal is a name. He seems to think
Baal is before you get there, he just said Israelis. That's not how you refer to ancient Israelites.
I know.
Israelis is a modern term.
I was going to give him a pass there. I just thought maybe you misspoke, but you're like,
it's written no, we're on going screen. Yeah, so I mean, go ahead. Oh no, I was just going to say that's a telltale sign that somebody is not particularly engaged with the literature, because no one, literally no one, says Israelis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he also seems to think Baal is a name. Baal is a title for the god Hadad, typically. Sometimes it's for other gods, but when we typically see Baal in the Bible, that's a title for him, actually. And it just means Lord in Hebrew, like Hosea 2:16 points out. Baal is not his name. So when you see Baal names, that doesn't mean they're referring to Hadad necessarily. So yeah, that was an odd argument. I'm not sure where he got that from. And he also tries to say, this is something I always want to ask you on. So it is true that we don't see a lot of Yahwistic names in Israel's early history. That we do see some occasionally, like Genesis 2:22 mentions the place Yahweh Yirel, I believe is how it's pronounced, where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac and God's prevent him. Yeah. That's a Yahwistic name early on.
Yeah.
I wasn't. So the way I've always understood this is that maybe because it's Trygve Medinger and other scholars have argued that Yahweh was a verbal form name, represented a statement, I will be that I will be. We would expect that would have changed over time with languages until it became more solidified as Yahweh later on. So they may have had another earlier way to represent that phrase, that specific divine name, until it became more solidified in the later Hebrew text. So I don't know if that really is a big argument against the Yahwistic worship, given the nature of the name and what Exodus 3 tells us about it. Mark Smith even alludes to this a little bit in his book God in Translation, that maybe that name had more of like a fluid approach, because you were basically trying to say the phrase or use a name represented the phrase "I will be that I will be." And given language changes, Abraham's not speaking Hebrew. There would have been different ways to represent that before it became solidified as a Yahwistic, as Yahweh later on. But I'm not sure. That's just an hypothesis I have. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I was just looking up the text. So it's Yahweh Yireh.
Yeah.
So Yahweh sees or Yahweh provides would be different ways to say that one. In Genesis, I think you said it's Genesis 22, verse 14. So you do, so that's at least one strike against what he's saying here, that there's no names. Well, no, there is a name in Genesis 22, 14, Yahweh Yireh. So that's something to be said. When it comes to the different, the way that Yahweh developed over time, yeah, that's a really complex question.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
debate. There's no actual agreement, as far as I'm aware, as to the origins and even like what the verbal root is behind the name. There are basically just theories. Actually, let me just go by memory here. I could pull it up, but I won't. Essentially, in earlier like Canaanite, you're gonna get like Hawaii, like it's different than
Hawaii, yeah.
like Haya is the verb for to be in Hebrew, but Hawaii, it would be in earlier Canaanite. And so when you create he will be what he will be, or I will be what I will be. But so he will be is actually like Yahweh is based off of a third person, like a grammatical form, whereas I will be is obviously first person. So Yahweh is based off the third person, and so you would get in Hebrew you get Yehyeh, which doesn't sound like Yahweh. But if you go back into like Canaanite, into this like earlier dialect, you would get Yahweh or Yahweh or something.
Yeah.
And so there's even that, like the it's different earlier on if you're going to go back, and it would make more sense with the Yahweh name than it would in later Hebrew. And so that's one thing to consider. Like even like the earlier dialect would sound different, would have different vowels, and even different consonants for that matter. For the verb to be. So if you want to do that, but at the same time, we're not even sure if the verb to be is the right one. It could also be actually related to rainfall, I think, as well. One who causes rain or something like that in an earlier time. And so it's just up for debate. And so to then make a claim on vocalization, I'm not exactly sure Smith's argument that you're making, but to make any claims on vocalization is then very difficult and suspect, in my opinion, because it's already no one's agreeing on the original here. So how do we then create a tree moving downward of how things change? But maybe I'm misunderstanding the argument as well.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I tend to favor the I will be that I will be origin, because at least we have a text, Exodus 6:3, saying that is the origin. So I think it's just in terms of parsimony, I tend to favor that one just from the text. But yeah, there's plenty of possibilities. And there may also been a cultural shift. Like we see, like, people, people may not have thought they could use that very secret Israelite name for name constructions yet, because it was still considered to be maybe like mostly known among the priests or the Levites, and it wasn't well known yet, or there's all sorts of possibilities here. And to just say, well, it didn't come out till later, I think is kind of a conjecture. There's a lot of pushback on that as well, I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's just unclear. You also have the causative as well, right? So if you wanted to go causative to make it more like Yahweh, in Hebrew and not in earlier like Canaanite dialects, you could make it a causative. So instead of Yehyeh, it'd be Yahweh or Yahweh, Yahweh, and so then you could also get the name. So he will cause to be, or he will do what he will do. He will bring forth what he will bring forth, which some people also make that argument for the name. So again, it's very much convoluted, but in the text itself, you get so that's like origins going way back. In the text of Exodus, it's something to do with being. It's not to do with rain or anything like that. It is something to do in the book of Exodus. This is being used to talk about either I will be what I'll be, as in watch what I'll be. It's up to me what I'll be, or I will do what I will do. I'll cause to be what I will cause to be. Like see what I do. I think those are kind of your live options in the book of Exodus. But then the actual like going outside of that, there's another debate as to like what this could be or the original form of this word way back. Yeah.
All right, let's continue on. I'll play this next section and then we'll stop.
We know about the Canaanite pantheon mainly from a number of texts on clay tablets from the 13th to 12th century BC, found in the city of Ugaritic in northern Syria. Among these texts, we have found the Baal cycle, which describes a myth about the thunder god Baal. In the most memorable part of the Baal cycle, Baal was killed by Mot, the god of death, and then descended into the underworld. Being a weather god, the death of Baal was interpreted as the start of the summer drought season. And El, we read, the father of both Baal and Mot, mourned his death. The goddess Anat, Baal's sister, eventually found his body and buried him, and then went on to kill Mot in order to release Baal from the underworld. And interestingly, the killing of Mot was stated in agricultural terms. We read, with a sword she splits him, with a sieve she winnows him, with a fire she burns him, with millstones she grinds him, in a field she sows him. Then we read, El had a dream in which the heavens rained down, which meant that Baal, the god of rain, had resurrected. Anat then found him, and he returned to his throne in his beautiful palace.
So here's the problem with this section is I did a lot of research on the Baal cycle a couple years ago when I did a video titled Jesus versus Baal. He's making it like, yeah, everyone just knows Baal dies and resurrects in this text. That's a big debate. Some say that he does, like Trigame Manager. Some say, no, what happens is that Mot kills a substitute and Baal just disappears. And some like Mark Smith say, no, none of that. Baal is not a dying and rising god. He's just a disappearing god. In fact, there was a inscription in Arabic from, I believe, the 1st century AD that was published a couple, like about a decade or so ago. But it says, it's alluding to the Baal cycle, and it says, Mot has celebrated a feast, the scorner eats, established in the succession of his nights and days, and behold, Baal is cut off indeed, but not dead. So we have this much, much later inscription, which seems to be referring to the Baal cycle, but it says Baal is not dead. The main problem that people don't realize is that the Baal cycle that we have is fragmented. The part where he fights Mot, that's missing. It's like Baal just descending to the underworld to fight Mot, missing. And then we come back and the gods are lamenting. Baal is dead. And scholars like Mark Smith have argued that they're just mistaken. Baal isn't dead. He's more like Hittite storm deities that disappear. So the gods just are mistaken. And Mark Smith is right. It never says Baal resurrects. It just says Baal is alive. So maybe the gods were mistaken and they realized he was alive. This is just, there's a lot of much more debate about this. And just for him to just say, yeah, he dies and resurrects. No, that is possible. I think I do tend to favor Mark Smith's interpretation. And if you want to see that one, it's in The Death of the Dying and Rising Gods in the Biblical World. That's, I believe, his paper. Also, he talks about in this book, The Origins of Biblical Monotheism, which I think is a pretty good book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, check it out then. Mark Smith's a great scholar.
Yeah, he's also super friendly. So, all right, let's get back to this.
In the text from Ugaritic, we also read that the highest god El was married to the goddess Asherah, and that their children included the gods of the morning star, the evening star, the sun, and the moon. In some cases, Baal was also mentioned as one of their children. Other evidence from this pantheon comes from late 9th century BC potsherds found in the Sinai Peninsula. On one of the potsherds, we read, Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, suggesting that the goddess was instead married to Yahweh. And quite shockingly, as you can see, there's even a picture that goes with this couple.
Okay, so about this, there's a lot of research on this. No, that's probably not Yahweh and Asherah. Let me put that back up there so you can see the people think this is it because the inscription Yahweh and Asherah is found near this. But this is like a road station that people were probably just scribbling graffiti on various things. I mean, they're not necessarily all connected, and people are assuming that they are. But first of all, the one thing about this that people I think tend to overlook with this inscription is this supports the idea that Yahweh was always assumed to just be another name for El in Israel in that region, because they're already pairing him with Asherah, who is the wife of El at Ugaritic by another name. So it seems like the simplest understanding is they are already understanding Yahweh to be another name for El there. But I mean, like that actual description. Let me put up my slide here because I actually have a quote here I want to show. So if I go to this, in Only One God, Minderk Dijkstra said, the shards of Pithoi A and B both contain inscriptions and drawings. Initially, some scholars assumed that the texts were written next to the drawings, but closer examination disclosed that there is no clear connection between text and drawing. It's hardly likely that the male best figure beside the female best figure represents a picture of Yahweh and his Asherah. Likewise, a relation between the harp-playing female figure and Asherah is impossible to establish. There may be a relationship between the composition of a cow with a calf and the stylized tree with goats standing on a line, representing Asherah. But even their appearance together does not necessarily include a religious relationship in this seemingly random composition of religious motives. We should interpret text and drawing as independent religious phenomena. In other words, this is a road station. People are just scribbling graffiti. The fact that it says Yahweh and his Asherah does not mean that those are actual depictions. It's probably Bess and Beset instead, from what I've seen scholars. And when I was talking to Adam Tippett, who was supposed to be on tonight, he said this. He said, that does not mean that Yahweh and his wife called Asherah, and to assume that would be a hasty generalization. Even the image he used is debated and vague with figures of deities, but we aren't certain who those deities are. Moreover, I even have a video on my channel, which is linked below, discussing this very thing. So before the discovery, we didn't even think Asherah existed, even though and we thought it was just a pole or a tree. Since the discovery of Rosh Shamra, though we now know Asherah was a goddess that existed. Was she a wife's? We still don't know. Both Emerton, Day, and Lumiere argue that Asherah, mentioned in books such as 1 Kings 15:17 and Judges 3:7, say that it's more likely referring to just a tree or a pole. So Asherah can be a goddess or a pole or a tree, depending on context. Now, as far as the inscription that we have, it is at the convergence of trading routes in northern Sinai. So we would expect to find different deities and images as we do. Several Pithoi have images like the one he has presented. This is a site dating to Iron Age 2, that is 9th or 8th century BC. Some gods mentioned are Baal, Asherah, El, and Yahweh. The image here is from Pithoi A, and Judith M. Hadley, who wrote her dissertation on goddess Asherah, says that the figure in the images are two best figures in a lie player. Inscription 2 is where you get excited because it mentions the dubious phrase, Amar Yahu says to my Lord, it is well with you. I bless you by Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah. May he bless you and keep you and be with you, my Lord. This inscription is not from Pithoi's A, but Pithoi's B. And there are a couple of things going on here. One being that the origin of Yahweh worship in the south near Adam, perhaps, or that the Sinai opposed to the north in Ugaritic. Both Judith Hadley and Theodore Lewis in The Origin and Character of God argue that the inscription here should be read Yahweh and his Asherah pole rather than the goddess herself. So some even argue this is not even referring to the goddess. I think it is, but some argue it's referring to an Asherah pole, actually, not really the goddess. And they argue that from grammar, actually. So
yeah, I can read. So I actually just pulled it up right now. I'll just read just really quickly, just to support what you're saying. This is from Hundley, Yahweh Among the Gods, 2022. Sorry, I'm just reading it as we're going here. So Asherah, the biblical equivalent of Asherah, features elsewhere in the Bible. However, it is not entirely clear if the female goddess or a cult object is in view. The term Asherah usually occurs with the direct object or in the plural, suggesting that in most cases the goddess was not in view. In context, these references seem to refer to a sacred pole, gives references, the wooden equivalent of a standing stone. Nonetheless, here's a caveat, there are clear instances where the goddess Asherah is in view. So 1 Kings 18:19 and 23:4. Thus, it is not entirely clear whether the sacred poles are intended as access points or symbols of Yahweh or Asherah. Most likely, the reference varies based on the context. And then I haven't read further, so I won't read further live for you. But
Yeah.
I think just supporting what you're saying there, that, yeah, it's not clear always. In some cases, Asherah is there, but sometimes it might be a pole. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I like it's, again, this is not a problem for the biblical account, because again, the biblical authors are constantly saying, stop worshiping Yahweh alongside Asherah, stop doing this stuff. So we would expect inscriptions from this time of this going on, because this is what the biblical authors are condemning. This is not somehow like a big shocking discovery that's going to overturn the entire biblical account. We should expect to find inscriptions like this, because we expected that the biblical authors tell us the Israelites kept doing this and they condemned it as wrong. So again, it doesn't support the evolutionary hypothesis. This is perfectly consistent with the biblical account of how things were going on in Israel this time.
I would add as well, just to that before you move on, that there are obviously consorts and wives of gods, but that's not always the case. So I'm here again, just looking at Hundley's work, because I had it pulled up. He just notes that, well, yes, you'll have Baal. So further south, you've got Baal was paired with Asherah / Athirat, El's partner Nugar. However, texts associate so Baal of Haman with Tanit, so another wife consort. In contrast, Baal of heaven has no known consort. So another epithet for Baal, and a emanation, let's say, or a locality of Baal. So Baal of heaven doesn't have a consort. So it's not as though this is always the case. It could be the case. And so it's just another thing to take in mind, for someone to think, oh, like everybody had a consort because it's popular. It is popular. And no doubt there were people who had a consort for Yahweh. Don't doubt that at all. However, it does not mean that it's always the case, because that is not true.
Yeah. All right, let's continue on. I think I just want to play one more section here, and then we will close this out. Well, we'll get
traces of these.
Sorry, I mean, we will get to super chats. We're not going to close it out. I promise I'll get to your super chats.
These past polytheistic beliefs are also found in the Bible itself. In several passages, El is described as being the leader in a council of gods. These quotes seem to stem from a time before Judaism became monotheistic. For instance, we read, "For who in the skies above can compare with the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, El is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him." And also, Elohim, also containing El, presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods.
Just a quick note, this is not a problem for biblical theology if you read Michael Heiser. Like the divine council, yeah, is in the biblical text. It's never interpreted, though, and according to the biblical authors, as if God needs a council to help him make decisions. The council is there because God is a relational being. He desires to have relationships with beings. It's not like Michael Heiser points out, the council in the biblical text is not like the council at Ugaritic, where like the gods have to fight or decide because they're all like impotent in different ways. The council in the biblical text never presents Yahweh as anything other than the high creator deity. So that's not an issue.
There's also a verse in which we read that El, here seen as a god of the entire earth, divided up the nations of the world among his sons, giving Israel to his son Yahweh. So here El and Yahweh have not just fused into the same God. We read, "When Elyon allotted the nations for inheritance, when he divided up humanity, he fixed the boundaries for people, according to the number of divine sons. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his own inheritance."
All right, so let me back up so I can put that quote back up there. So this is the go-to text to try to argue that Yahweh was originally seen as a son of El. And this one, like, I feel like they're just stretching things here. That's not what it says. It doesn't say, the text doesn't even say El. It just says Elyon, which is a title meaning most high. It doesn't say Yahweh is a son. People make this inference. It's a scholarly reconstruction. But it doesn't say that. And let me put up a quote here from Otto Eichfeld, which I have used so many times to make this point, because it really hits on it for me. So Otto Eichfeld said, The author of the song, it is true, when speaking of Yahweh's relationship to his people, avoids probably intentionally the application of the hitherto used active verbal form, and so does not say directly that Elyon gave Israel or Jacob to Yahweh as his portion, but is content to establish the fact that Israel has become the property of Yahweh. So the verse does not say there is this Most High who is giving Yahweh an inheritance. That is an inference based on limited data. Mark Smith in God in Translation says this: despite possible appearances to the contrary, the composer did not intend any picture of polytheism with his rendering of verses 8 and 9. In fact, he likely thought of El and Elyon simply as two of Yahweh's titles, as they are elsewhere in the Bible, and not as a separate God El. The implied reference to the multiple divine son likely did not bother the composer of the poem. In the wake of the identification of Elyon as a title of Yahweh, the divine sons are only implied in the text at best. It was probably easier for the composer to pay or no little attention to this matter, as this was a standard trope of divinity that the composer had inherited. Thus, the passage shows something of an older worldview of translatability of the national gods, even as it ultimately rejects it. So what's his basic point here? His basic point is that the composer is taking something, maybe some older theology ideas about there being this high God El who divides the nations up, gives them out to his sons. He's inheriting this idea or this trope, but in his view, that's Yahweh who has divorced the nations, and he has made Jacob for himself in that. I am perfectly compatible with thinking that maybe that author inherited lines even from some older polytheistic worldview. And I make an analogy constantly with Acts 17, because Paul quotes the pagan poet Aratus. In him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Was Paul intending to teach pantheism, Stoic pantheism? No. He's taking lines and he's reinterpreting them in clearly a Christian understanding. The author of Deuteronomy could have been doing something very similar. Hey, we know there's this theological view that the high God divided the nations up. Well, guess what? That's actually Yahweh, and he has kept us for himself. So I think Mark Smith is right on that. It doesn't say that Yahweh is a son of El. This is an inference, and I don't think the composer even intended to give that picture, even if he's inheriting some older ideas. I think people read way too much into that brief passage there.
Yeah, I mean, the text doesn't say that Elyon gave to Yahweh Israel as his inheritance, as Yahweh's inheritance. Like, you can, in the poetic parallelism, verse 8, when the Most High apportioned, verse 9, for Yahweh, that is that Most High that I just spoke about,
right?
His portion was his people. Like, it's like there's nothing in there that necessitates that Yahweh is one of the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, who are given by the Most High. Rather, you can easily, like Mark Smith said, these are interchangeable epithets for Yahweh. So yeah, I think I agree. I think too much is being made of it there. I'd have to go back and check the Smith's citation, the citation you just gave. I haven't read through that, but so I can't yes or no that. But from my own reading of this text, I think it's an overreading, and it's also an opaque text. It's also difficult to exactly get at it, like some of the grammatical features, which I won't get into right now. I'm just looking at it. It's like it's confusing text, so I get why people take different interpretive options on it.
Yeah,
you always need to, in my opinion, just leave open room. Like, no one's saying people are dumb for taking a different view on this. There are really great scholars who do, but it is an opaque text, or at least maybe opaque is too strong. It's not clear. It's difficult, and so it's okay to take different options on this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with the parallelism. The parallelism lines Yahweh up with the Most High, and I think people overlook that point. The other thing is Jonas Greenberg did some stuff, and I cited this in my video, Polytheism in the Bible, which is linked below. He points out there's a lot of epithets in there that would combine, make a cumulative case that it's already equating Yahweh with El. But also, people make a big deal about the word inheritance used, and they'll be like, well, inheritance implies he had to get it from someone. But Deuteronomy 4:20 uses the same Hebrew word, inheritance. And everyone agrees that's very much monotheistic. That's very much assuming Yahweh is the Most High, and yet it's also using the term inheritance there. So why does the term imply that Yahweh has to be getting an inheritance from the Most High in Deuteronomy 32, if that's not what the term would mean in Deuteronomy 4. I think people are reading too much into that. And real quick, just to put up some more slides here that I wanted to bring up. I think Alan Millard makes a really good case about this whole idea about Yahwism evolving from polytheism. He points there's not a lot of good evidence for that. And he says, whatever opinions about the date of monotheism appearing in Israel are held, the fact remains that her faith is unique in the ancient world. No other ancient beliefs current there have affected so many people over so large part of the world for so long time. And then he says this, a unique phenomenon is awkward for historians since they have no standard way to explain or assess it. So they make strenuous attempts to fit it with a pattern of known features in the same general way. Then Millard cites Raleigh, who said, is indeed surprising and no easily way to be accounted for one simple evolutionary lines that Israel attained a monotheistic faith. So, I mean, we don't have a lot of good evidence that Israel actually evolved into a monotheistic faith. We don't really see that in the biblical text. All the texts we have show Yahweh is assumed to just be another name for El. He's already considered to be the high creator God. All the archaeological data is consistent with the biblical story that Yahweh revealed himself to early Israelites, and then people started to syncretize him into pantheons or with other gods or with other religious beliefs. It's not going to show you this evolutionary picture there. So I think people are assuming too much with the data. We don't have that picture is what I'd argue.
Yeah, I mean, that term is always slippery, monotheism, right?
Yeah, well, true. Yeah,
I monolatry, henotheism,
I hate the term monotheism.
It just doesn't make sense of the ancient world because they clearly believed that other gods would be helpful to them, which means they believed the other gods existed. It's just a matter of how are they classifying them? How are they classifying Yahweh? What was Yahweh trying to get them to classify themselves or himself as in relation? Like these are the questions, right? To say there weren't other gods, because again, the definition of God is different than we might often think of when we hear God in the West. In the West, right? God is really like a spiritual entity of various strengths or power or value, and so I don't like the term monotheism there.
Right. We have to unfortunately use it, but I wish it didn't exist, to be honest. But yeah, I think Deuteronomy 32 is the best case they can use to try to argue this evolutionary hypothesis, and they read way too much into it. Like I was talking to someone at ETS about the whole word inheritance, and he's like, I can find places throughout the Bible where someone is getting an inheritance and there's no one giving it to him. Like it's not just in Deuteronomy 4, it's in other places. So it's people are reading way too much into these things. And I think that there's just too much evidence against it to even make that case. In a video I've linked below, I did a while ago. It's called Israel's Revolutionary Monotheism. I go into a lot of these points in more detail in that video, but I'll just quickly cover them. I say that Israel has a unique monotheism monolatry, really. And I cover various aspects that don't really support the evolutionary hypothesis. Like we see in early texts, Yahweh is viewed as genderless, not manifested in nature. He's got no needs. He's not syncretized with other head gods like Marduk or Asher later on. We see no theogony for Yahweh. That's no count of how he came into existence. I make the case that it's most likely that the Exodus 3 is the origin of the name. So it applies a unique name for the name Yahweh that would have been understood early on. We have no story of his mythical ascension. He's described as a jealous God, which is unique in the ancient world. Gods weren't jealous. As long as you sacrifice to them, you could do whatever you wanted. But Yahweh is jealous for some reason. You can only worship him. He's also the basis of what is known as good. His will is made known through the Torah. And then what scholars like Jean Bottero and Karl van der Toorn, John Walton have noted, we get a very interesting view of ethics that comes out of the Torah. The Torah isn't doing ethics, but a very interesting understanding of how ethics should works comes out of the Torah from that. And so there's all these different factors I cover in there that should make more of a case that the Yahwistic religion was unique. It very unlikely could have evolved as it is. And I think it fits more with a revolutionary model, this idea of this sudden appearance. But I don't have time to go into all that now. If you want to check out that video, it's linked below. I don't see a good reason to think that Yahweh slowly evolved as a son of El. then became El, and then became just the only God. I think it's far more likely there was a group in Israel that was always pushing against the polytheistic view or syncretism and said that, listen, we believe Yahweh revealed himself to us this way, and that's the way we should view him. And they were constantly pushing against Israelites wanting to syncretize him and resort to paganism.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what you said, that it is strongly held in the scholarly community that Yahweh came out of quickly came out of nowhere. We don't see Yahweh in earlier northern Semitic inscriptions, texts, whatever. Like it's or really anywhere. It's that Yahweh kind of just appears on the scene as a name, and so how that happened, of course, there's debate, but it does. There is a kind of just sliding in, car screeching of Yahweh onto the scene, which is hard to account with a evolutionary model like that.
Yeah. And so, there's, of course, that's not the end of the debate. There's obviously more to go on, but I think there's a lot of arguments that have just not been addressed by a lot of more critical scholars, unfortunately, on that. So, all right, let's check our goal here. It looks like we are close to getting that goal met. And if you meet that goal, I will show you a video that I have coming out in February, titled "Everything You Missed About David and Goliath." I'm going to go into that, and I'm going to make the case that Goliath isn't even the real enemy of the story. He is a side character. So that video will be coming out soon. I'm also going to deal with some critical issues, argue that it's a composite of different sources because Saul seems to contradict himself in places, and I'm going to argue that's not the case. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Oh man, I wonder if we should chat about that, because I'm a Septuagint guy, so I go Septuagint on this one. So I don't know what you're going to conclude, but I think the Septuagint gives strong evidence that the Masoretic text is later than the Septuagint version. So something to consider. We can talk about it. We can talk about it offline, but that's how I resolve that issue. I think the Septuagint's an earlier text, and actually omits I think it's like 63 lines or something of 17 and 18 in 1 Samuel, or chapters 17 and 18 in 1 Samuel. So there's an article by Emmanuel Tove that I could point you to that you might want to check out before you do that video, just as some data to consider.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Yeah. So
yeah,
we'll definitely talk about that. All right, let me get to some super chats here. Mike, I do appreciate your live streams, and I do like the understanding that Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox are actual Christians. I have to tell the critics this. Yep, totally on the same page with you there. Hi, IP, do you have any specific version of the Bible in English that you consider to be particularly reliable or like? I recently acquired the ESV Bible, and I find it to be very good. Yeah, I use ESV just from how I was raised, as well as NASB, I think is good. I like NET in some places. I also recommend getting a Septuagint as well. I think those are good to compare for sure.
Yeah.
Somehow my super chat with being weird. I'll skip this one for tomorrow, but just here to wish the IP team and everybody watching a happy new year and many blessings. Thank you. Much appreciated. If Adam and Eve are meant to be the first priests, why is there a need for a priesthood in Genesis? Why is there a need for a priesthood in Genesis 2? Surely all humanity would have equal access to God before the fall. Is this worth thinking on? Well, just compare it to the New Testament. We all have equal access to God, but Jesus is still our high priest. So the high priest makes that access work. He's the mediator. And likewise, Adam and Eve, I've argued, would be in that same kind of role. So yeah, we have equal access to God, but they're still a priest. So that just is part of the process, is what I say.
Yeah, a means of special revelation, a means of greater revelation, a means of greater mediation, greater access. Yeah.
Heiser covers two powers in heaven, visible and invisible. Yahweh, rabbis. We misspelled Yahweh. Rabbis declare it heresy at the end of the 1st century because Jews were believing Jesus was the visible Yahweh in his flesh. Alan Siegel, Jewish scholar, wrote a book. Yeah, it's an interesting book. I need to go back and read it because I've not read it for years. But yeah.
Yeah, it's been a few years for me to for that one as well.
IP, you claim that Yahweh is not pagan, but have you considered that up? See, your claims are debunked and your dawa is weak. I don't know what you mean by UP. But have you considered that UP? What is going on?
I don't know. I want to get the joke because I want to laugh, but I don't know.
Sorry, man. I'm confused. Well, his username is UP, but have you considered that? You see it? You see the image in there? I guess he's talking about
Okay.
Yeah.
Calvin peeing. Yeah.
Just contributing, much appreciated. Thank you so much. How long ago do you think Adam and Eve would have to be a decent time if they were one of the first Homo sapiens or whatever theory you hold to? Well, luckily Joel knows the exact answer on this, and he can give you the proof. Give him the proof.
Yeah. 7,232 BC is the exact date.
There you go.
Yeah, I think
on
that's
a
clear
Wednesday.
from the biblical text.
On a Wednesday.
Yeah. You're an idiot. It was obviously on the day before the Sabbath. Like, what kind of moron would think that? Yeah. Yeah. No. Great. Good question. Depends what you do with Adam and Eve. Depends how you're interpreting this story.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many views on this. I mean, that's a whole stream in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
It depends. Do you think Adam and Eve were the first humans? Which then you have to think about. Okay, well then why were they? Why were there lots of people outside that Cain was afraid of? Yeah, like when is this story happening? I actually think, along with Michael, that Genesis 2 is presenting a sequel to Genesis 1. I think you can make a good claim for that. I think it sets it up. I actually want to do a video about this. I told you about this, Michael. Do a video just about the connections between Genesis 1 and 2 and like why I don't think they're actually at tension with each other. But the Genesis 2 sets up the scene basically a long time ago, before agriculture, before there was rain, before Yahweh had caused rain, as in before the flood, and then before there was a man working the earth. That is, before there was anyone doing agricultural work. Not that there were no humans, but there was no one doing agriculture. So this time before time that as we know it in the ancient Near East were these people, Adam and Eve. And so it's really setting things up in a time almost unknowable, right? In my opinion. But it does seem like then it mentions other people being around, even despite it being set in this long ago time frame. So we're dealing with so long ago, it's almost like it's so far out. Like, how are you supposed to answer that? Whatever view you take on Adam and Eve, it's too far in the past to know, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say it's got to be over 10,000 years ago, at least. But again, that's not, you couldn't nail me down on that. I could be wrong.
I don't even think that's the point of the text. It's not trying to ask you to figure out dates exactly or anything like that. I think the numbers are doing something different. But I think you've done videos on the numbers. The numbers are not intended to be giving you dates in that way. They're trying to give you a different message, whatever that may be.
Actually, if you add the ages from Adam to Moses, you get like, I think it's 12,600, and you have the 1,260 in Revelation. So you have that idealized number. And then if you actually add the ages from Adam to Moses, you get like 12,600, which is really interesting.
Oh, I thought you were starting to make a joke. I have no idea what you're talking about then.
Oh, no. I'm just, you take Adam's age, his son's age, and you add them all up, you get exactly like 12, all the way to Moses. And so it seems like someone's like trying to do a numerical message from Adam to Moses, from Eden to the promised land kind of thing.
Oh, I have never thought about that. I would have to think harder and look at the data on that one. Although I do think that they're doing weird things with numbers, and they care a lot about numbers in ways we don't. So, yeah.
For sure. Are you a Molinist, and why do you oppose Calvinism? Because I think Calvinism is incompatible with what the scriptures teach. I think Molinism is the most parsimonious reading. It encompasses Arminius points and Calvinistic points. So I think both Calvinists and strict Arminians take verses that support them, but they don't look at each other's verses. And I think when you take both of them, you end up at Molinism. But that's just my view.
I mean, you can see my channel for some stuff on Calvinism. I do more like exegetical deep dives. I did, especially in Romans 9. That's kind of my best viewed video. And then Ephesians 1 as well. I'm not a Calvinist. Some of my best friends are Calvinists, but similarly to what Michael said, yeah, I don't think the text on a close reading and on the best reading supports that particular view. I don't disrespect people who hold it, and I really respect people who are trying to take the text as seriously as possible. But that's also what I try to do, and I don't think that's where you're going to end up. So, why do you oppose Calvinism? Makes me think this person probably is a Calvinist. If they say oppose, maybe not. If so, I would really. If there are some texts that often get brought up in that. So, for example, Romans 9, Ephesians 1. Check out my video on that if you want to see like a take that would read it in a different way than you typically hear from Calvinist circles. There are lots and lots of scholars outside of that world. Often that world can be a little bit insular and a little bit of a bubble. But there are many faithful Christians, scholars outside of that camp who take the text seriously, and many in church history who take the text very seriously and don't end up in that position in the church. So, it's going to take some time and thought, as all things do, all worthy things do.
Any good resources on the evolution of post-Christ Judaism? That's not an area I've really looked too much into. Can't think of any.
I'm so weak on the rabbis to think of like a off the cuff. I can think of like primary sources and stuff, but to actually think of like secondary literature where somebody's seen the evolution of Judaism into the rabbinic period, I would just go to like an Oxford encyclopedia on rabbinic Judaism, because that's what you're getting after the New Testament and after Jesus, and just take that as a starting point. You could usually online, if you just type in Oxford encyclopedia, like it's there, oftentimes for free. They have a lot of articles. If not, a library would have that for you, and just start going from there.
Thank you, Joseph, for the very, very generous super chat. Just wanted to help. Very appreciated. That's definitely helpful. Jones, text me back. Let's raise some funds. Sorry, I completely forgot. Jorge, I will try to get on that. It's been a very busy holiday season for me. IP, in your video on free will, still useful. It's been 11 years. Any recommendations if the video is too old? Check out stuff by Tim Stratton. He does a lot more on that than I do. But yeah, I'd have to go back and check. I don't even remember the video at this point. I've been looking for some solid source material on ancient Near East history from prehistory to Jesus. Any recommendations? Thanks for all you do. Yeah, check out a good starting book, I think, by John Walton, Ancient Near East in the Old Testament. I think it's a great book. His second edition came out a couple years ago. I've always enjoyed that. Carl Vandertorn has some great books. Jean Bottero has some great books. That's some pretty good stuff. If you're looking at ancient Near Eastern history, John Bottero, I said, is great. Karen Ray Nemitnejad has a good book on it. Daily Life in Ancient Mesopotamia, I believe is what it's called. A friend of mine, Mark Chavalas, has got a good book, Mesopotamia and the Bible. There's a lot of great books I can recommend. I'm sure Joel can even give more than I could.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go to primary sources, Pritchard and Fleming, Ancient Near Eastern Texts, the Ancient Near East, an anthology of texts and pictures from 2021. You could also go to Hallow, which I believe that's Context of Scripture is Hallow. These will be like the actual sources and kind of arranged in theme or location or time. So if it's a hymn or a poem or narrative or law, if you want to get to, so that's reading the original source materials in an English translation. That's awesome. I actually, above all things, do that, because that will really get your head in the way that people are writing and thinking, and just do that a lot. And it's English, so you can do it. Just go and find them. They're worth your money. You already named a bunch of really good resources.
The story of David and Goliath is one of the most famous in the Bible.
Sorry about that.
All right, you know what? I didn't want to say anything anyways. You know what?
Sorry.
I was done.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button.
Niehaus, Ancient Near Eastern Themes in Biblical Theology. There's one. Against the Gods. Currid. Did you mention Currid? I thought maybe you did.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah. The Polemical Theology of the Old Testament. What else we got here? I'm just looking at a list, and you've already mentioned Chavalas. You mentioned the IBP Bible Background Commentary is really good. If you want that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. There's more like technical stuff, but I think you've given some good examples. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think we can move on from what you said. You gave some good ones.
Merry Christmas and Happy Early Epiphany on the topic. What is the current scholarly state of henotheism in that's Arab days and early Moses days Judaism? Question for both of you. I think a lot I think the Akhenaten cult was henotheistic. There's definitely examples of henotheism in Mesopotamia with certain deities. There definitely was a lot of henotheism. It wasn't the standard for sure, but I think there's definitely agreement that did exist in that time for sure.
Yeah. The thing is, you can find pretty much like you said anything. People are unique. Cultures are often, while we meld, we also have unique. There's not really new things under the sun, as Ecclesiastes says, right? So like yes, you will find it. Like, what do you mean by scholarly state? I don't really know what they're asking there. Like, yes, these things existed, but what are they saying by scholarly state? Do you know?
Yeah. No, I think that he's just asking, like, do scholars agree there was henotheism in the past and that around that time? And I think this answer is yes.
Yeah, and like you said, with the Egyptian resources as well. You also said Judaism here. Judaism would be later. You want to think Israelite religion, because Judaism is specifically what develops in the post-exilic period, right?
I call it Yahwism.
To help this person develop their terminology. Judaism is later, right? And you're saying early days, so you want to say Israelite religion or Yahwism or something like that. Yeah.
Amazing stream. Do not shut up. Take my money. You got it. I don't know how much that is in USD, but I appreciate it. Why wasn't
my bank account?
Why would you got? Do you have a donation page set up?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, Michael.
You see, it's hard to give you money. You don't have a donation page set up. So, why wasn't the letter of First Clement included in the New Testament? My argument, I think, from the early church is it wasn't necessary to teach the faith. The books that we use were sufficient enough to teach the faith as it is, and it wasn't necessary for the corpus of Scripture. So that's what I'd say. And I think it's kind of like it could have been included, because I think Clement, you could argue, was trained up by Peter. So it's a possibility, but just wasn't necessary. Thank you for becoming a member. Happy New Year. May God bless you and your family. You too. KIP, God bless you for doing great stuff here. Some people argue that Torah took some rules from the Code of Hammurabi. What do you think? Yeah, I don't think it took them. I don't think it, like Moses had like a copy and he was like, yeah, we'll just take. I think those were just a lot of standard rules that he would have known about. It was part of the cultural milieu or background or river they were drawing from. And he was like, yeah, these are great things. I'm sure he may. I don't know if Moses read the Code of Hammurabi, or I think they just knew about various aspects of different legal corpuses, and then they just incorporated them into the Torah, and that's why we see overlap. It's coming from the same culture.
Yeah, I would say that there are some who think that there's direct dependence. The main proponent of this that's most out there is David Wright. Inventing God's Law will be his work from the late 2000s. This is not agreed upon by all ancient Near Eastern and biblical legal scholars. In fact, very prominent ones, not evangelical, push back against Wright's proposal. In particular, I think of Bruce Wells, who wrote an article as a critique of Wright's work, saying what Michael just said, that they're swimming in a certain river, and they're all going in a certain way, in the way that you talk about law and the way that you talk on the kinds of things you include in law. And we have multiple law codes where you see very similar topics arise, and it's not as though they're all borrowing from each other. Rather, this is just what you write. This is what you write about when it comes to law and the types of things that matter and the kind of cases that you want to give. But then you can put your own spin on those cases. So you have a case of striking a pregnant woman. Okay, well then what are we actually going to do with that? So you take the case and then you develop your legal thoughts from there. And so there will inevitably be overlap, but there are also divergences that are significant. And I would argue in the biblical text, we also see some significant divergences, in my opinion.
Yeah. Blessings, brother. We need more of these. Yes, we stream every Monday at 8 Eastern on this channel, so I'll be back next week. You think Kim Iverson will debate you or AP? My gut feeling is she's extremely scared to get debunked and humiliated. Yeah, I don't know if you know about this, Joel. She's on Twitter saying Jesus wasn't a Jew, and she'll debate anyone on this topic. And she knows Jesus wasn't a Jew, and here are great reasons. He was from Galilee, therefore he can't be a Jew. His followers thought he was the Messiah, therefore he can't be a Jew. I'm not making this up. It's so stupid. I can't even fathom how she thinks these are arguments. Oh my God, it hurts my head.
Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? Somebody tweeted me this, and they said, "Can you give your opinion?" And I just said, "See Jason Staples' work, Paul and the Resurrection of Israel, just recently last year, and then his previous work before that, which he builds upon in this recent one, where he says like ethnicity is flexible. Being a Jew is adopting cultural aspects And so it's not just based on biological descent or where you live. It's about adopting these kind of cultural boundaries, both religious and, religion and culture are so intertwined. But basically, that you could become a Jew that way. It's flexible ethnicity. So to say from Galilee means nothing. It absolutely means nothing.
Thank you so much.
She probably is making the Judean argument, right? Like, oh, Judean, like it's geographically located. And that's not how ethnicity worked in the ancient world.
It's so stupid. It's hard for me even to represent it properly because my brain can't even just comprehend what she's trying to say. It's just, yeah, it's something else. Hey, Pete, do you know any good Anglican YouTube channels? Yeah, Stephen Boyce, he's Anglican. You can check out his channel, Facts Podcasts. I don't know anyone's beyond that. I know Jordan Cooper, but he's Lutheran. That's close enough. Is it true that Dr. Chris Dost proved that the Hebrew Sheol is best translated as First Temple Hebrew, word for David Wood's basement? Yes, that's David Wood's basement. That's definitely true. You got us.
I saw that publication. Yeah, I saw that publication.
Yeah. Do you take the talking donkey to be literal Numbers 22, or is there something else going on here? I mean, I think it's a miracle. So I think it's not like the donkey can actually talk. The Bible says God is doing a miracle here. So I think that's what it's trying to tell us.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is often stranger than fiction. I don't know. I also believe in the supernatural. So I guess it depends on your perspective on these things. Can God speak through whatever? I'm not sure that the donkey had vocal cords or in the way that we think or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, it's also a story, so you got to take it that way. Thank
you for the very generous super chat. That's a lot of Canadian dollars there. Much appreciated, Nathan.
Whoa.
Thank you so much for that.
Oh my goodness. You could, yeah, that's some cash. I mean, not where I live in British Columbia. That's like buying a coffee, but like if you go to Alberta, that's a house.
Yeah. Do you have any interest doing videos on New Perspective on Paul? It's such a niche thing. It's not really been important for a lot of the apologetic stuff I do here. So no, I tend to agree with N.T. Wright on the New Perspective on Paul. I read his 1,400 page book. I thought it was pretty good. So, I mean, it's like one of those things. I think a lot of it's just a game of semantics when you new perspective versus old perspective or not new perspective, I guess. A lot of it's they're saying the same thing. They just want different words to describe it.
I wouldn't say quite that. I've actually done quite a bit of work in this, and I'm teaching Romans in a week at ACT seminaries. So I think a lot. Like I said, I don't like being pigeonholed. I'm a biblical scholar. I think about the New Testament as well. I can read Greek probably better than Hebrew because of my Septuagint work. And so I do a lot of thinking about the New Testament, how the New Testament relates to the Old Testament, covenant, all that kind of thing. And so, I think it's more than just semantics. There are broadly, it's kind of three camps. There's like the Reformation traditional approach to some of these concepts, to Judaism, to what the righteousness, what it means to have righteousness, to be imputed righteousness. That's kind of their phraseology. Then you've got the New Perspective, which is really just a way of saying we don't agree with the old perspective on Judaism. So it's a different way of framing what Judaisms were in the first century around Paul. And then you have also Paul within Judaism. So another kind of approach that's been rising in popularity in the last little while, 20, 30 years. And it's positing differently that Paul's really addressing just Gentiles, and he is concerned mostly about what to do with them, and that Christ is and what's going on with Christ is, in some perspectives, mostly about them and how the Gentiles are fit into this whole thing. And so he's not really writing with Jews in mind. They can keep the Torah, they can keep doing their thing. He expects them to keep doing their thing. And there are different perspectives that arise out of each of those, but there are significant interpretive differences that come. And sorry, Michael, you didn't ask for this, but I'm giving it you now.
No, that's great.
There are different.
I'm probably wrong. You're probably right. Go for it.
Yeah, and so there are differences in key interpretive places. So, for example, what does it mean for to be justified? What is the righteousness of God in the book of Romans? Like, what are these things and what do they do? And what does it mean to follow the law in the first century? What are the bounds of following the law? What does it mean to be a faithful Torah observant person? And these are kind of the big debates that are going on. And these different camps are going to land in different places. But the New Perspective broadly is going to say that there wasn't a perfectionistic legalism going on in the first century, most by and large, in that people weren't trying to keep the law perfectly to be saved. Rather, the covenant was a covenant of grace in which God brought Israel in by grace. And then the question is, what does it mean to actually be a faithful covenant member now that God has shown us that grace? So you're already in by grace. God, the covenant is gracious. God is gracious. And that Judaism would have thought, many strands of Judaism would have thought that in the first century. The question then is, okay, how do you maintain that covenant membership? And that's really the big question in the New Perspective. And then again, the Paul within Judaism is going to offer a different take on things. So these are live debates, and the New Perspective on Paul, I think, is important because it's helping us get a better grasp on what Paul is actually getting at in his letters. What's important to him? What is he arguing against? Is it perfectionism, or is it inclusive versus exclusive kind of ethnocentrism or something like that? Or is it even what does it mean to be a faithful follower of Torah? And these are hot debates, live debates at the time of Paul. And so this is an ongoing discussion. Not something I would necessarily say I should throw my hat in and do on YouTube, because there are many other better Pauline scholars. I'm not a formal Pauline scholar, but I do this as an armchair Pauline scholar because I care very much about what the Bible says. And so, I mean, if you want to get a taste of this, check out my Romans 9 video on my channel. I have to plug myself at some point. Hey, everybody, you should go check out my stuff. Yeah. Check out that, because I do get into some of this, and you'll see it appear in my dialogue on the New Testament.
Yeah, what I basically meant with semantics is we all agree we're justified. The difference is like, how is that come about? Like, I think that's what I was trying to get
at. But even what does it mean to be justified?
Right.
Is it like, is justification a positional status? Is justification a transformational status? Is it both? Is it like what's going on with that term, right? And that is a part of the debate. Is it a rectifying? Is God making you right, as in like changing you, transforming you? Is it just positional? Like this, these are live debates.
Yeah. I loved your video, The Case for Ancient Monotheism. Is it possible that polytheism was a later corruption of monotheism, i.e. result of the fall? So I'd say that's the biblical account, is that it was originally just worshiping God, and then humans corrupted him through sin, and then this sort of really comes about by Genesis 11. And I cover that more in my Genesis 1 to 11 series. I don't know if that's the case for everywhere on earth. I don't think we can make that claim, but I think the biblical account is trying to make that claim for their history, that they think that's how the way it was originally set up, and then people started corrupting things. And I give some evidence but basically the point of that video is just to show that, yeah, Adam and Eve could have just believed in one God. It's not like it was impossible to believe or have a monotheistic tendency early on. And we see good reasons to think that could have been the case. Biggest hot take in biblical scholarship. I've got a hot take.
Who ours or somebody, or like each of our own, or what?
Maybe. Yeah. What's your biggest hot take in biblical scholarship?
Like my own hot take?
I guess so. Yeah.
Is that what they're asking? My hot take is that the Pentateuch is meticulously put together in ways that we have just started to discover.
Yeah. My hot take is that it's earlier than most people think. Although it was updated. It was definitely updated over the years. I just think there was probably some early form of it. And yeah, that's a hot take.
Yeah, sure. I could get on board. Michael and I have chatted offline about this. Yeah, I could get on board with a lot of it being early. It just depends how you want to frame that.
Yeah, I think the development, and I want to be very clear, the development is complicated. It's probably a long process. It's not like it was just like the current Masoretic form was stamped with Moses' approval in like 1200 BC and then moved. I think it was a process. My hot take is just that there was an early form of it before most people think. How do you absorb your info? Do you read books all the way through? Yes. Do you read articles primarily? No. I read books and articles. Use books primarily for source material instead of straight reading, looking for advice. I read with a highlighter, first of all, so I highlight passages and books. I'll make notes later for videos, and that helps me memorize. You also have to remember I'm making videos, and that's going to help me retain a lot of the information. But I mean, a good thing to do is read with a highlighter and then go back and read your highlights. That's what I do. A lot of that. That's what I say.
Yeah. I actually have a very hard time retaining information. I have to hear it multiple times. I'll say to my students often, and everyone really, repetition is the mother of learning, at least for me. And so usually I'll have to do things a few times, or I'll have to go back and read something again, or sit there and think about the idea. So like Michael said, highlight, and if there's something really important, stop, talk about it in your head. Don't just move forward. Like, talk about the idea, play around with it, go, oh, okay, what would that mean for this and that? That will go a long way in helping you retain. I read both articles and books. I have to. Articles are usually a bit more up to date with the current debates, because books take forever to write. So do articles, actually. But generally speaking, you're going to see more of the live debate in articles, in recent articles.
Actual question: is there a place where we amateurs can see who are some scholars we can trust and do sound work that isn't warped by bias? Everyone's going to be warped by bias. That's just the problem. And anyone who claims they're not is probably the most biased. Read everyone. I mean, read as much as you can, get different perspectives. I mentioned Mark Smith. I don't agree with a lot of Mark Smith's conclusions, but I still think he's a great scholar. So yeah, I don't know if you can find anyone who doesn't have bias.
Yeah, that's difficult. You can't. Everybody's got, there's perspectives. The question is, do you see them trying to engage with the other side, or do they seem open or not? Do they mock and ridicule others on another perspective? I find that off-putting, and I think that shouldn't be the case. We should be able to have healthy dialogue. So unfortunately, you're going to have to just read widely and recognize that you are also biased. Everyone's biased, and I can't say anything more. Michael already said it.
I have yet to hear a compelling reason to include the deuterocanonical books from the Septuagint to form in the formation of doctrine. Thoughts here? One of the best arguments I've seen is like St. Augustine says they should be included. Some of the early church fathers say, like him as well. I think those are some of the better arguments there. I'm still up in the air on that, though. I don't know where I'm at, despite
well, they said in the formation of doctrine, not in the formation of canon.
Oh, okay.
And you're saying
I see the point
canon.
there, yeah. I don't think it's necessary for doctrine, no.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So for doctrine, in the Christian tradition, well, that's a big statement, because again, there are some who take these books. Compelling reason to include the Deuteronomical books from the Septuagint in the formation of the doctrine. If you're in the Protestant tradition, then I would say they're not a part of your canon. A large portion of the church history, they weren't a part of canon. To say, now some people will say, the Septuagint Bible, like you see these codices in the 4th, 5th centuries that, they have deuterocanonical books in them, therefore they must have thought they were canonical. That might be where this is kind of coming from. No, you see Gallagher, I think it's Edmund Gallagher, who in his recent introduction to the Septuagint, he's got like a whole chapter, a big section on that, just how that just is not how they thought about putting these texts side by side. Often they're appended at the end. There's no set amount of deuterocanonical books. Like, here are the Septuagint deuterocanonical books, and here's the Protestant canon. No, it doesn't. Like, the early manuscript tradition does not bear that out. You have different books appended to different codices books, and there's no rhyme or reason, and so he makes the case that you can't say there's a Septuagint canon, deuterocanonical canon to even look to. Like, what do you even mean by deuterocanonical? Because there's no set classifications of which books are in or out. So check his introduction to the LXX. You can probably find it online. He's also teaching a course at Trinity Western, where I work, in a couple months here, a summer course on Septuagint.
Yeah. Thank you for the generous super chat there. Much appreciated. Isaac asks, is Yahweh the name of God the Father or the Trinity? I already answered this earlier, I think before you came on. Yahweh is the name of all three. Yahweh the Son, Yahweh the Father, Yahweh the Holy Spirit. It's not just the Father. Jesus claims to be Yahweh, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, and go back and check that out. So yeah. Who's read more books between you? Oh, obviously me. Look at this. See this? See that? Yeah. Look at all those.
I only got a couple back here. Yeah.
No, probably Joel. Joel's a real scholar, so Joel did.
No. Now let me fill you in on the dark, horrible truth. When you become institutionalized, and this isn't just me saying this, this is the words of Richard Middleton a few months ago when we were at SBL together. He said, we just don't read as much as a lot of other people because you're busy. You're marking papers. You've got other. Yeah. It's like you actually read less when you're a professor than when beforehand, or
Interesting.
even being often as a really, really enthusiastic layperson. So I try and read as much as I humanly can. I constantly am listening to books and PDFs. If I'm driving, I'm listening to a PDF, just because that's how I get a lot of my content in, because of how busy it is. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. Trinity Radio, thank you, Braxton, for the super chat. Why did you tell Ken Hovind Eve was not made from Adam's rib? Because the Hebrew word is selah, it could mean side, and I think it's the context says bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. I think it's implying more than just a bone. So that was my argument, Braxton. Can always
you can make a counter argument. There's an Akkadian, because the word selah does not mean, or does not have the meaning rib in the Hebrew Bible, but it does have the meaning side. However, there's an Akkadian cognate that does mean rib. And so that's strong evidence, in my opinion, that it could mean rib in Genesis. But that's probably not what Kevin or Kent or whoever that was, Hovind, the Hovind. No, so what like in that debate you were having, I'm sure they're trying to make a case for rib in wild ways that we wouldn't care about or think are completely outlandish. But yeah, I think you can make a case for rib. So push back.
Yeah, I just say Jesus isn't wisdom in that passage, and plus it's deuterocanonical. So all right, so you guys got a couple super chats came in before I started the goal, so I think we basically got to 50. So I will play this video for you guys. This is just the opening.
What's going on?
I set up a goal, said 50 super chats, $5 or more, and I'll play a sneak peek of a upcoming video for February. So I'm gonna put that up now, and you guys will get a little bit taste of what I'm doing. This is more of like an exegesis of that passage.
The story of David and Goliath is one of the most famous in the Bible. People love to compare it with modern events. Anytime a weaker party overpowers a bigger one, we call it a David and Goliath story. The moral we think we should get from it is that even the little guys can win, even when the odds are stacked against him. Although that's part of the story, there is more the author wants us to realize. Everyone knows this famous story, but we don't really know it. If we look at the cultural context, we can see there is more to this story, including who the real villain is. This is not simply a story about the little guy using his skills to overcome a giant. This is a story of how God can do the impossible. There are two ways people tend to derive a moral from this story. The first we can call the worldly view. We are meant to see ourselves as David, facing a mighty challenge. But if we are brave and face the challenge head-on, we can overcome it with our skills and courage. After all, David had experience fighting lions and bears. He was already trained to take on giants, so to speak. So if we believe in ourselves, like David did, we can overcome the giants in our life. The second understanding we can refer to as the modern Christian reading, which says we should not see ourselves as David, because we cannot overcome giants on our own. It is only God who can take down giants. Really, David is an archetype of Jesus, who fights our battles and has defeated our sin for us. We should really see ourselves as the frightened Israelites, and Jesus is the one who went out and fought the battle for us. To be clear, I'm not denying there is truth in this. We can use this story as an analogy for Jesus defeating sin. But I think there is another dimension to this story, and a third way, which blends the two. On this mode, we should see ourselves as David, but we should come away with the lesson of the second understanding, which is that it is God who fights for us. First, a quick note about who Goliath was. The text tells us he was a champion of the Philistines, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. This would make Goliath about 9.5 feet, or almost 3 meters. No human has ever been this tall, which has led some to suggest that Goliath was not entirely human, but perhaps a descendant of the Nephilim. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Greek Septuagint, and Josephus all record Goliath's height at 4 cubits in a span, which would mean he was about 6.5 feet, or around 2 meters. A height which is well within the range of normal humans to grow. The biblical texts also never say that Goliath was something other than human, and there are good reasons to think the Nephilim, spoken of in Genesis 6, were also just humans and not the descendants of fallen angels.
All right, I'll stop there. I think that's enough. That's what we're going to go and do. I'm going to go into like an exegesis of the text, talk about, I think a lot of it is David and Saul arguing through honor and shame culture, like the questions they're asking. They're trying to shame each other constantly. And so I'm going to go into that. I'm going to go into the argument that David actually had the advantage that Baruch Halpern put out, arguing that David basically went out with a revolver, and that's not fair. And I don't think that's entirely accurate. So I'll be going into some more of that later on. So that video should come out in February. Much appreciated. There's your sneak peek. Thank you for all the super chats.
Yeah, Happy New Year. I saw Happy New Year there. We're almost there.
We did it. We're at the end. So appreciate it. Thank you for everyone for coming.
Nice.
I'm going to, as soon as we get off, I'm going to put Joel's channel below so you guys can go check him out and subscribe. I appreciate him coming on last minute. Anything you want to talk about you've got coming up on your channel or anything like that?
Oh, I wish I had stuff coming up on my channel. Michael, I'll be streaming with you again in a couple weeks here. We're going to do a response to the video that Kip did, Kip Davis. He brought on Heath Durrell, he's an expert in child sacrifice in ancient Israel. And he brought on Dan McClellan because we did a video about child sacrifice in Exodus 22 and Ezekiel 20. And unfortunately, it was troublesome. It's an unfortunate case where we misunderstood each other, it seems. So how about an hour of the video is them arguing against something I didn't argue or wasn't trying to argue. So maybe they I don't want to blame them or anything.
Welcome to my world. I feel like that happens all the time here.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It sucks because Heath Durrell is a very, like, they're all smart guys, but like they brought him on as the main guy. And so I was really hoping like, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome. Like, let's hear some like pushback against this argument. And it just wasn't really there. And so we'll go into it, and it'll be a good lesson for people to see how people can misunderstand each other, especially when it comes to really precise argumentation. But yeah, we'll do that in a few weeks. I want to do a couple videos, but again, it's really hard to find time. So if you go subscribe to my channel, maybe I'll want to do more.
Yeah, so I will link it below. That you can just look him up, Joel Correcco, right now, but I'll link that below when we're done. I'll be back on my channel next week for sure, same time, and then you'll be on the following week. And that's also, I've got a very fun stream planned that week as well with a friend of mine. I think we moved it to Wednesday due to scheduling conflicts, but I'll tell you about that after. Yeah, well, as soon as we get off, I'll tell you. I'm not telling everyone yet because it's going to be a big surprise and it's going to be fun. So thanks for coming, everyone. I'll see you guys next week, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Subscribe to Joel. Thanks for coming on. We already answered that earlier. Anyway, thanks for coming on, everyone. I will see you guys next week, same time. Have a happy new year, and thank you for all the support.